Something you and I talked about before, and that in a way is why it's so important to have a shared vision, a shared purpose, because it then gave me, for example, I knew where we wanted to take our organization. How can I contribute to that? And what am I noticing that maybe is a little outside of the box or things like that?
Welcome to The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods, the nation's first podcast devoted to the business and lifestyle of the hospitality industry. Now, here's your host, Woolco Foods CEO, Steven Toboroff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods. I am your host, Steven Toboroff, and today I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that I'm about to have because it's with somebody that I've had the opportunity to get to know over the last year plus, and it's brought a lot of value and a lot of insight and a lot of positive things into my life. So before further ado, let me just introduce my guest, which is Margaret Morrison. Margaret is a CEO and executive coach helping leaders address the chaos and complexities that come with scaling their businesses. She also leads a CEO peer advisory group in partnership with Vistage. The group is focused on sharing outside perspectives and helping each other become better leaders, make better decisions, and drive better results. Previously, Margaret worked at Ernst & Young for over 24 years, where she was a partner and managing partner focused on top-line growth, helping grow their America's financial services business from $280 million to $5 billion plus over 17 years. She's also an independent board member and does volunteer work with her therapy dogs. So, Margaret, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so looking forward to our discussion.
So the first question I wanted to ask, Margaret, because it sort of came to me as I was preparing for this, is I would love to know sort of about your beginnings, your background, and what led you to go into business, and in particular, what led you to Ernst & Young. Would you share with our audience sort of your background and how you sort of began and commenced that journey that led you to Ernst & Young?
Sure. So I actually started, it's funny, especially I've got daughters that just graduated college, and you never know what your major is and what you're going to end up doing. My major was actually special education. I had a double major and minor and had an opportunity to work with two very famous professors and enjoyed it, but knew during that time that this was not something I really wanted to do. And a friend of my sister's worked for IBM at the time. And I always found it so fascinating listening to her journey and the business and just what made up of it. So I actually applied to places like IBM and Xerox and things like that, and ended up getting a job with Xerox. I was at Xerox for 12 and a half years, focusing on really relationship management, sales, and management. The first place that I got to manage a team, they're known for their sales process and sales training. So it was a great experience. Ended up getting my M.B.A. at night, thinking, okay, I really want to do something different. Wasn't quite sure what that was. Worked for a small company as vice president of sales and marketing. And then in the 90s, similar to other professional services firms, Ernst & Young was trying to figure out how do they get their really smart technical people, their auditors, their tax professionals, their consultants, to build lifelong relationships with their clients and cross-sell and expand that connection. And so they did a variety of trainings as other law firms and accounting firms did. And, the people who were good at it probably didn't need the training and they continue to be good at it. But there was a whole group of professionals that, again, they didn't get into the business to sell or that relationship component. They love the technical. So Ernst & Young decided they were going to hire people with 15 to 25 years of go-to-market, business development, management experience. And that's when I joined them in the 90s. And at first they were trying to figure out what to do with us and what to call us. I was involved in a global organization trying to get this rolled out. And then in 2001 is when I had the opportunity to go into financial services. So little background of how I got to Ernst & Young.
No, it's fascinating. And what was it like, Margaret? I'm curious because you ascended to the position of partner and then managing partner. What was that process like in terms of within a large organization? I know you and I know you're an exceptionally talented person, but I also know in large organizations, they have bureaucracies, there's politics. What was that journey like for you navigating and working in that system and yet being able to successfully ascend to such a high position within the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's something really important when I think of mentors and sponsors, right? I feel really lucky that when I came to Ernst & Young, I got connected with someone who was really pushing the envelope and ended up being the global COO many years later. And he was kind of looking for a partner in crime. So I lucked out in terms of finding someone who was really trying to be very entrepreneurial within this structure. And he really had my back and sponsored me to a point that when this opportunity came up after working with him for 5 years or so, he helped position me as an unusual, typically they only made partners of technical professionals. And he positioned me saying, hey, if Margaret does this for you in the first year, would you agree to make her partner? And again, very unusual. He stuck his neck out and they gave me a seat at the table and it worked out. And this other person kept their bargain in terms of putting me up for partner. And, for me, becoming partner was more just having the ability to do what I needed to do, having the respect, having a seat at the table. So I thought that was really important to get that under my belt so I could really help move change in an effective way. So as an unusual partner, there's only a handful of us that were non-technical partners, if you will. And again, I attribute that to having a wonderful sponsor. And then for the next several years that got me to managing partner, it was again, someone who I worked with who gave me a chance to bring my skill set to the table, which was very different than what the other partners had. He sponsored me and stuck his neck out to help me be positioned and get the opportunity and experience to take my career to the next level. So sponsorships and being a good sponsor, finding sponsors and mentors are really important. They were important to me, and I think they're really important to people in any company.
What do you think he saw in you that made him comfortable or desirous of putting his neck out and putting you in that position? Because obviously he must have seen something in you. I don't know if he ever communicated what attribute or attributes there were, or perhaps you have your own theory, but what do you think it was?
That's a tough one.
Well, the reason I ask is because, again, I think for people listening to the podcast, and we're going to get into a lot of subjects, the audience of the podcast is people who are in the hospitality business, but a lot of entrepreneurs as well. And, I've come to know you, and as we were saying, sort of leading up to this, it's one thing to go into a large organization and be talented, and then that's the only thing. And sometimes those people don't ascend. Then other people differentiate themselves because they not only have great talent, but they're incredibly reliable. They're great with people. They're empathetic. They have attributes that transcend the basic and identifiable, if you will, abilities necessary for the job. And I was just curious about that for myself. But obviously, if it's something that doesn't jump to mind, that's fine as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about where I was in my career at that time, and I became much more self-aware of things I did well or what I was looking for, I knew any job I had, I knew what I had to get done. So for me, it was like, how do I do that in an exceptional way? Making sure I bring quality and doing all the things I need to do to be successful in that job. But also, I always had a view of how do I take this to the next level. To me, that was fun and that was challenging. And it was doing the right thing as well.
Very interesting.
For example, I would sit down with my boss, who actually got me to managing partner. He's actually currently the global CEO of Ernst & Young right now. And I'd sit down and every year I'd say, okay, I know you're not asking for this, but this is where I want to take our organization or this department or whatever. What do you think? I just want to get buy-in because if I would put effort in this, I want to make sure we're on the same page. So he saw me taking that initiative and thinking outside of the box and being a good thought partner to him and to others as well on the leadership team.
Well, what's interesting about what you say is it actually dovetails with something I was exploring in a podcast that's going to be published right before this one. And it sort of reveals some of the leadership skills of your mentor as well as some of your skills, which is, it's my opinion that great leaders are looking for people around them that are not just taking initiative, but that are taking initiative in a creative and a dynamic way in how they see things. And so I can only imagine how delighted he must have been to have somebody such as yourself coming to him with ideas, with initiatives, and making sure that you have buy-in first. I mean, that for people that want to have great organizations, that's exactly what you want for people within them, because that's what gives you almost a force multiplying power. So that's actually very illuminating and interesting.
You know, something you and I, again, we've talked about before, and that in a way is why it's so important to have a shared vision, a shared purpose, because it then, you know, it gave me, for example, I knew where we wanted to take our organization. How can I contribute to that? And what am I noticing that maybe is a little outside of the box or things like that? So,
absolutely. Now, I've come to know you through Vistage. I'm a member in the group that you chair. And I would be curious to know, Margaret, when you were at Ernst & Young, you obviously were working with very, very large companies, I'm sure many publicly traded. What would you say are some of the most common positive things that you see these larger companies doing that are not often being done by mid-sized companies, or the types of companies that we're working with in Vistage? In other words, are there any identifiable sort of habits or behaviors or practices that you did see in the larger businesses that are not always there or often there in mid-size that perhaps should be? Anything of that nature?
it's an interesting thing because I also, since Ernst & Young, have worked with a lot of small, mid-sized companies in helping them scale their organization. And so, for example, I think it's really important to have, well, as you grow, structure and processes are important. You want to be able to replicate what you're doing, right? But at first, as a startup, for example, you know, all you're focusing on is how do I sell more and how do I get my name out there and is our concept resonating, right? But at a certain point, in order to scale, you need that repeatable processes and some infrastructure. So, you know, I would say that not always, because I think big companies could be over-processed and too much structure, which doesn't then allow for creativity. But, you know, I think you've got to find that balance. So it is providing people with the support they need and the direction, but also gives them the opportunity to be innovative and creative. So I think many smaller, mid-sized companies don't always have those processes, and they may have grown. They could have had hyper growth and just, you know, kind of ran off at that. And I know we're seeing some people, even in our group, that now is coming back saying, boy, I need to build these processes. It's really finding when's the right time to put those processes so you can continue to scale. I would say that that's something that big companies, if done right.
No, it's an interesting point because for us at Woolco, we're a mid-sized company. I would say on the mid-sized company on the larger side, perhaps. And what's interesting is we're competing against much larger companies. Many of them are publicly traded. And we're sort of in what I like to consider to be a sweet spot because on the one hand, we have more than enough firepower and ability to do everything and more that the bigger companies can do. But we're also at a size where we can give a really curated experience to our customers, which is what people desperately want nowadays. And I think you make an excellent point because as companies grow, and I think this is probably particularly important in the hospitality industry, you always want to keep that creative element. You always want to keep that sort of human serendipity type dynamic that enables you to really have those meaningful connections with your customers. But at the same time, any aspect of your business that really lends itself to quality, systemization, discipline, whatever phrase you want, I think it only enhances the creative element because you're not dealing with avoidable challenges that arise due to lack of systems in certain key areas that may not have the same creativity. And I like what you were saying about that because I think that that's something to be mindful of. And I think no matter how big a business gets and how much they grow, and you can even see this in the marketing campaigns of larger companies on television, they're always trying to create the impression that they still haven't lost that human touch, right? That ability to really resonate. And some of it's authentic and some of it isn't. So that's an excellent point.
Yeah. And, goes to also, Stephen, and I think you guys do this really well, is your customers also want a consistent experience. So you need to build in certain processes. So first of all, your own team knows what success looks like and how to communicate and provide those services consistently. But I think you guys do a really good job also in terms of figuring out where you need that, but then being, agility is really important. You need to really understand on an ongoing basis what's changing in the market so you could address that and address it quickly, because processes could also kind of get in your way from moving forward. And that is the downside, I think, sometimes of some of these big companies. They're so heavy in process and layers of red tape that it's hard to move things forward.
No, definitely.
So it's kind of the sweet spot between the two of them.
Now, one of the things that you do as well is you're coaching business executives across the spectrum of business. And what I would love to know is, have you identified in your time, and this can of course go beyond just your business coaching, but just your professional experience, which is vast. What would you say are maybe the one or two attributes or habits or behaviors of leadership that you think really need to be there for people to be effective business leaders? In all of your interactions and all of your research, if you could distill it to maybe one or two that are at least at the top of your list, I would love to hear that.
So this is definitely a biased response. I think authenticity, for me at least, is really important. Leaders who have a purpose, who show passion, who show empathy, to me, that's really important. And I know at times decisions have to be made. You are running a business, but with that authenticity, there's a feeling of trust. You're in good hands. They're going to try to do the right thing. And those are really important qualities, I believe, are important in terms of, a really good leader.
I think you're right. And I think that those qualities have become even more in demand over the last few years, when we were deprived of human interaction for a period of time, or at least a substantial components of human interaction. I think it's something that people value more than ever. And I think it's one of the main things that people are looking for in the workspace. I think it's impossible. You mentioned the word authentic, and I think about that a lot. If the leader of an organization does not embody the values that they want other people to have, it's going to be impossible to lead. So, for example, in my company, a huge value, if you will, is treating the customer with enormous respect, deference, attentiveness. And were I to go around the company and be a rude and inconsiderate and unpleasant person, people would know that I'm somewhat of a fraud because I'm asking one thing and I'm behaving in a manner totally consistent. On the other hand, when people watch you treat everybody with respect, when they watch you be an active listener, it gives you that level of credibility that, okay, now this person is actually authentic. I will listen to what she or he is saying, and then you can lead. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah. But you know what? You are such a great active listener. And I think that's a really important quality too. I think I've tried to get better at that. That probably wasn't something early on that was top of mind for me, which I think now I try to put that more, front and center. You do a really good job with that, Stephen. And always,
Well, I
as long as I've
appreciate
known,
that.
like that's really, I think that is really important. I think about if I want to follow someone or where I look at, you know, where as a customer I'm treated really well. So whether I'm looking at someone who is a leader for me, I want someone who I believe is aligned to my values and is going to try to do the right thing and is going to listen and be open. Again, they're going to have to make decisions I may not agree with, but if all those other things are there and their communication is effective, that's okay.
You mentioned active listening, and I thank you for the compliment. It's something that I've been working on for a very long time. And I do believe it's so important, whether it's actively listening to your team, to the people who work for you, work in your organization, or listening to your customers or listening to prospects. The point I really drive home to our sales team, especially the newer sales reps, is if possible, your first objective when meeting with somebody is to get them to explain to you what's going on with them. What issues are they facing? Because generally speaking, people are not going to change vendors, business relationships, if there isn't an issue. And there are so many different challenges that chefs and mixologists and food and beverage directors and hoteliers and owners face that it's really not optimal to begin pitching anybody until you understand what's going on with them. Because you may be pitching them on price and their issue is the truck from their current vendor never shows up.
Right.
You may be pitching them on quality of produce and their issue is they need to order late. And the same sort of examples can be given to your employees. If you're the type of person where one of the blessings that I've had is I have a great team of senior management here, and all of them are very comfortable offering a contrary opinion to one that I put forth. And by my listening to those opinions and going with them 9 out of 10 times, it's had an enormous benefit for my company. But if I didn't create that dynamic where people feel comfortable saying to me, Steve, I hear what you're saying. I don't think we want to do that. I think we would be better served doing this. It's a great asset. But to do that sort of leads me to the next part of where I want to take this, because in order to be an active listener, the question then is what keeps people from being active listeners? And there's a lot of things, I think. It can be ego, it can be insecurity, it can be vanity, which is another form of insecurity. So my question to you is, because one of the things that I really respect about you is when you communicate and when you're running things, you definitely convey empathy, you definitely convey an upbeat, positive approach, but I always get the feeling from you, and I know you're an authentic person, that you're engaged. Those are all attributes, what I would like to say, of the mind. And my question to you is, we know with business leadership, Margaret, that there are things that you have to do in terms of being organized, whatever that looks like, scaling up the practices you have to do. But so much of what's going to be the determining factor of success in a business is the psychology of the leader. And I'm wondering what your thoughts would be in terms of what type of, I don't want to say personality, but what type of work do you think people should be doing either by themselves or collaboratively to put themselves in the best possible frame of mind to be an effective leader? So sort of frame of mind and thinking as differentiated from habits and activities.
What comes to mind as you're asking that question, it's really a learning mindset is what comes to mind. To be a good listener, you've got to want to engage and learn, right? And it's about asking questions and trying to find out what's important to your client, your customer, what's important to the employee, what are they thinking? Why are they coming with that perspective? What's going on there? So it's having a learning mindset and continuing, how do you learn and grow? It's not this finite, I've got this job. I, know what my job is. It's in this box and that's that. It's about, okay, how do I continue to evolve that? What's changing the marketplace? Why is this important? What do other people think about it? So It's asking questions. It's gaining perspectives from outside your peer group or your company to make sure you really understand what else is going on there. Because it's not always going to come from your industry or from your company. It's going to come from other places where sometimes you learn and grow and don't expect it.
No, I really love that answer because I agree with everything you're saying. And, you used, I was, as I was listening to you, the first thing you were talking about, which I agree with, is questions. And it's definitely having the right questions asked to your team, to your prospects, but also there's enormous power in the questions that we ask ourselves in terms of getting into the proper frame of mind to be effective. If we wake up and we say, why does this crap always happen to me? Why does this day suck? Why doesn't this person ever listen? The brain will answer those questions for you. But what I always try to do is whenever a circumstance arises, whether it's a circumstance that arises or even if I have to be the sort of proactive determining factor in this, I try to ask myself quality questions. Where is the opportunity in this situation? What can we do now to achieve our objective? And the brain will answer those questions. So I completely agree with you with respect to the power of questions. And I completely agree with you what you say about the learning mind. The worst thing is when a person, and this is a challenge that I think a lot of business leaders come up with their team. It's a very common thing, at least it's happened to me in my business with a few people, where they believe that they know everything and they believe that they're doing things perfectly. And these are not bad people. These are actually very good people and very dedicated people and very talented people. And it's been my experience that when they adopt that type of thinking, it's a form of defensiveness. And then it's incumbent upon me to try to unpack that and say, look, we have to understand that there's millions and millions of people out there doing things. It would be crazy not to think that maybe we could learn something, even if it tweaks things a bit. So I really like what you're saying. I think being an active learner, particularly for a leader, is so important because you need to constantly be getting your information. What would you say is a behavior or a thought pattern that is one that people should avoid at all costs? Let's flip it around and let's take it from the other suggestion, because sometimes it's good to learn from what not to do. In your dealings, whether at Ernst & Young or as a coach, what trait, behavior, attributes have you seen that are just non-starters? And if people be honest with themselves and do a self-assessment, they really want to make sure they don't fall into the habit of adopting for themselves.
So it's interesting because I was going to add one other thing to your last point about learning, but I think it dovetails on this because it's kind of the opposite. I actually think it's really important also for people to allow themselves to be vulnerable, to allow them to admit mistakes and that it's okay to make mistakes. And so to answer this question, it's people who have the attitude they have to be right. It's this, or everything is black or white type of thing. And then they kind of stick to their guns. They're very stubborn and won't even go back and self-evaluate or evaluate a situation and debrief to win, something we recently had a conversation about. So I think that is a tough trait. When I'm looking either someone for our CEO group or coaching, that's someone I'm going to avoid at all. I'm not interested in working with someone who thinks they know it all and has self-limiting, and it is self-limiting belief. They may think it's not self-limiting, but it is. So I do think that those are the things on the negative side, but I think it goes back to, if you could, besides having a learning mindset, the idea of it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, hey, I don't know something, or I've made mistakes. And then what do you do with it, right? It's like, okay, so now what? How do I take it to the next level?
No, absolutely. And to go even a little bit deeper, when people find themselves, if people will be honest and look at themselves, and we've all done this, I know I have, when we find ourselves behaving in that manner, it's a reflection of insecurity. And unwillingness to be vulnerable is a manifestation of insecurity. Now, what is insecurity? Insecurity is nothing more than a story that we tell ourselves. And yet that story as with everything we tell ourselves, because, and this was something I was exploring in an earlier podcast. It's something I've been giving a lot of thought to. I'm reading now Marcus Aurelius's Meditations and been giving some thought to some various philosophical concepts. In business, it's extremely important, at least I found, to be we talk about active listening, to be an active reader, and something you said earlier. Read things and learn things that are outside of what is either your comfort zone or what you think is in direct alignment. Like, I don't have to be reading journals all day about distribution or about foodie stuff. To be an effective leader, I have to really look at everything that's available to me and see if it can make me better. And when we talk about insecurity and defensiveness and a closed mind, those are not immutable characteristics. Those are stories we tell ourselves. Those are a filter that we create. And yet that filter has so much power and it shapes reality. And if we were to simply change it, and this is something that I think is so important and would love to know your thoughts on, because mindfulness about what it is that we are giving credence to. Look, let's take it like this. In business, so many different things happen on a daily basis. Would it not be better if people could work on the process of not allowing exogenous factors to have so much power over how they think and impact other people? Because just because you have a disappointment and a frustration at 10 in the morning, ruminating on that, being upset by that, dealing with that with a whole narrative isn't going to help you make a better decision at 3 in the afternoon, which is another personality issue. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and you almost need a process to, how do you put that in the parking lot? How do you say, okay, I'm upset, da, 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 da. How do you put it somewhere that you'll get back to, but it doesn't impact the rest of your day? So I agree with that. And it's a tough one. And it comes probably a little bit with maturity and some things like that as well. One of the things you said, Stephen, which I think you do really, really well, and a lot of things I admire about you, and this is one I know I've mentioned it to you before, is I think that in any situation, you are really good at listening for what are those few nuggets that you could take from this and apply it to you, apply it to your business. So I think you do that exceptionally well. I think people could learn from that, because instead of just saying, oh, this whole topic doesn't apply to me, or I'm already doing it, I'm good at it, or whatever, I think you really do listen to learn and always try to say, is there a nugget or two that maybe I haven't thought about, and what can I do with it?
No, I appreciate that, Margaret. I mean, I know myself well enough to know that when I was younger, I was an extremely defensive and unpleasant and prickly person. And it all came from insecurity. It all came from a lack of sort of harmony with myself and the world around me. And, thank God I've evolved over time through a lot of reading and research and thinking. And you're correct. I mean, I like to think that I'm very much a results-oriented person. Like, if my team were to come to me today and say, Steve, we have some phenomenal ideas, but here's the ironic thing. We're going to deliver the results you want and more. But we're going to need a favor. You're just going to you can come to the office and stay in your office, but you're just going to have to take a step back for 6 months and let us do it. But I guarantee you're going to get these results. I would be happy to do it. In other words, I'm looking at results. I'm not interested in people giving me credit. I'm not interested in deriving any emotional nourishment or egotistical satisfaction from this business. I'm interested in achieving objectives, and I'm interested in bringing value to our customers. I mention this because when you were talking about sort of getting the nuggets out of things, the only way you deprive yourself of doing that is that exact sort of closed mindset that you have to fight against, which is, I know this, or who's this person to say this to me, or this is stupid, I don't like this. Those are all stories. Again, that's not reality. That's the filter. And if you can take a step back and say, hey, I'm not going to give credence to that. In fact, I'm going to create a new story right now, which will then change my reality, which is, powerful question. What is there to learn here? And so I appreciate that. I just think it's so important to be effective in anything in life.
Yeah. No, I did too. And I would tell you, I look at my journey, I would say that early on, I probably was also much more defensive and more, hey, I got this, or looking for different things. And of course, I where I've evolved to right now. So I agree with you. I think that's right mindset to have. What's interesting, does that come with maturity and time? And I know not everyone gets there, because I would say, sounds like for you and for me, it did come a little bit with maturity and time. But I agree, the sooner you could get there, the more effective you're going to be.
For me, I think with maturity, hopefully, but I know a lot of people my age and older who are not.
We'll never get there.
We'll never. So for me, what happened was, I think it starts with just being honest with yourself and saying, look, I want to improve. I want to get better. Where I'm at today is a reflection of my best thinking, so to speak. And so for me, what had an enormous impact in enabling me to drop the defensiveness of insecurity and vanity and being off-putting to people and egotistical and all of that stuff, which is very negative and non-productive, was just through my readings and thinking and being willing to engage in some self-assessments and being honest, because it's like you said, nobody's perfect. And again, like the Stoics, if we just ruminate in the past to bring up stories that make us sad or frustrated or agitated, that's a waste of time. And if we bring up stuff in the past to just beat ourselves up, that's a form of masochism. It's not productive. But if we reflect on something like a debriefing, and when we're talking about debriefing, what the speaker, a very impressive gentleman, said was, it should be constructive, meaning to build up. That was the note that I took. That's a great way of looking at it. When we do self-assessments of ourselves, as we should, it should be constructive. It's not opportunities to beat ourselves up. It's opportunity to identify, oh, wow, I can do this differently. And if I do, I'm going to get better results. And that's going to be what I want. But it is interesting. And I could talk to you, and fortunately I do have an opportunity to talk to you in the future in Vistage and other stuff. But I want to be respectful of your time. And I want to conclude with one question here that I think will tie this all together, but would love to know your thoughts on it, which is, as individuals begin, and in this one, the emails that I get that I find the most gratifying are ones from entrepreneurs. Amazingly, the podcast has some people that are entrepreneurs that are starting out. There's a lot of people that want to be in the hospitality business and restaurants, but sometimes I get emails from people who are just entrepreneurs and other things. And I always like those the most because I would have loved to have some more pointed guidance sort of when I was starting out. So my question would be, when someone's at the beginning, the very beginning, and they say to themselves, you know what, I'm going to strike out and start this business, or I'm going to strike out and try this new concept. It could even be changing jobs, but let's keep it to starting a business. What would you say is the habit or behavior that they want to get right from the very beginning, and then they can build on stuff after that? Because, it's an exciting time. People can be motivated either by a phenomenal idea or they've just had it with their job and say, that's it, I'm going to do it. And it's a very emotional decision. But the emotion will eventually dissipate and then the work begins. What do you think should be sort of the one thing that you would suggest people have as a foundational habit or thought process as they begin that journey? And I don't want to pigeonhole you to one, and it doesn't even have to be that binary.
No,
just something. Let me rephrase it, because putting it as one is kind of not helpful.
That's No, I'm okay. I'm up for the challenge.
Good.
I think it's important, if you're starting out, you need to put some type of plan together. What's your purpose? What's that, we would call it, that the big, hairy, audacious goal, that you'd like to get to. And then what are the things with a time frame the next year that I need to do to move it forward? What I find is sometimes people who don't think about that, they don't always spend enough time focusing on areas that they need to focus on, or they get sidetracked because they're overwhelmed with all the different things they have to do. So I think it's really important to have a plan, to lay out some of the initiatives that's going to help you move forward. And, you've got this bigger purpose or landscape or vision that you want, but what's the goal for the next year or two? And make sure that you really stay focused on moving that forward and not get sidetracked. So Did that make any sense?
Well, it's funny. I know it more than makes sense. I love that answer because I would agree with you. I think having a plan is the single most important thing. Warren Buffett said that he would rather work with a person who is described as mediocre but has a great plan than someone who's a genius that has no plan. Without a plan, without the directives, without that vision, nothing happens. So it's a great.
But you don't
answer.
know where you're going.
You don't know where you're going.
You don't know where you're going. You can run really fast, but you're in place, or you're going
exactly.
left field, and that's not what you wanted to do.
No, and at least if you have a plan, you know what you have written down, and then over time, as things evolve, you can always change your plan or deviate from it. But to not have it. Well, Margaret, this was really delightful. I appreciate it. I wanted to just have us have sort of a free-flowing conversation, and we did. But I would also say to people who are listening that are really interested in getting those nuggets of information that can, drive their business forward or drive them forward in what they want to achieve, it might not be a bad idea to listen again and maybe take some notes because there was a lot of very actionable and excellent information that you shared with us, Margaret. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And I always love our conversation. So appreciate you including me in your podcast series.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Margaret. And again, thank you for taking the time. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Profitable Table, fed by Woolco Foods. Please be sure to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. And to learn more about Woolco Foods or Steven Toboroff, please visit us at woolcofoods.net.